Good morning, everyone. Yes, now the entropy level has increased, and that is good. You're welcome to our technical session. If you look in the book on page 16, you would find this session was supposed to take place in the afternoon, but there have been some changes, and so we'll have that now. So in the book, you see technical session 7, but it's now number 1 or 2 or 3. There are 3 sessions this morning. It's on energy development in Ghana. But before we start, I'd like us all to take a moment's reflection. And we all come from different backgrounds. So let's reflect for a minute and pray silently. Thank you very much. We have 4 organizations who are in the energy sector who are going to share some perspectives with us. And as you can see from the brochure, we have Future of Power Generation in Ghana that will be delivered by the Volta River Authority. We have the State of the National Grid that would be delivered by the Ghana Grid Company, GRIDCO. And then we have Gas Infrastructure Master Plan for Ghana that would come from Ghana Gas. And then we have Perspectives of the Future Energy Sector that will be coming from the Energy Commission. We are not going to go in the direction that has been arranged here, or in the direction that I read. I'm using my crutchy powers to rearrange so that it would flow. And so we would start with the organizations that looks at planning for energy for Ghana, and that is Energy Commission. And so what you see here as number 4 is now number 1. And we are privileged to have from the Energy Commission Dr. Ni Daakun Asante. He is the Director of Technical Regulation at the Energy Commission. He's a chemical engineer, post-graduation, 32 years. He's worked for 32 good years after graduation. His doctoral is in process integration, and he is responsible for technical regulation at the Energy Commission. And so we have the right person to talk to us about the perspectives of the future energy sector. And so let's join with a good round of applause to encourage and start it, Dr. Ni Daakun Asante.
Thank you very much, and good morning once again. So I sort of did this presentation thinking I'll be the last one, but since things have been reorganized, they say the first shall be last. So we are going to talk about the future of the energy sector. And even though it's not the full energy sector I'll be talking about, I'll be focusing essentially on the power and the natural gas sectors. We'll not be talking so much about petroleum, that is the oil downstream or upstream. And I will also not be talking about the wood fuel sector. But when we at the Energy Commission talk about energy, we include all of these in our strategic national energy plan that we produce. So today I'll be focusing on the power and gas sectors, looking at the supply-demand balance outlook, the outlook for capacity additions. In the power sector, additionally, I'll talk about disruptive technologies and their impact on our planning. And then lastly, we'll look at where we are going, which is summarizing the perspective for the future. So starting with the power sector, supply-demand balance. One of the things which I guess we're all aware of is that we currently have an overcapacity. We have power plants which have been built, which are physically ready to generate, but are not doing so mainly because we do not need the power that they would produce. So at the moment, we have dependable capacity in the region of 4,000 megawatts, slightly below that, but it will increase above that when we finish a number of plants which are currently under construction or even in commissioning. Some of them are, construction is complete. You'll know of SenPower, which is undergoing commissioning and will be ready within weeks or days. But even now, we are not sure whether when it's ready, it will generate. We have another couple of other plants who are also under construction. Our current highest peak recorded is about 2,700 megawatts. And by the end of 2022, with some projected demand growth, we would cross 3,000 megawatts, still under the 4,000. Now, these are, of course, projections. The future could be different. And I guess the interventions that we'll put in place may sort of mitigate some of this outlook. So after including a 20% reserve margin, so to cater for any losses in capacity or whatever, there's still a significant excess. And even when we look at a much higher demand scenario which has been projected, essentially we will have significant excess until the middle of the next decade. Now this illustrates what I've just been saying. Basically, we've just completed an integrated power sector master plan, which is part of our strategic national energy plan. This was partly funded by the USAID, but it involved all the sectors, the various generation, transmission entities in the sector. And what it shows, as you can see, this is the total capacity that we have, and this is the projected demands plus our 20% reserve margin. And this gives you an idea of the gap right up to 2022. Clearly, we have more capacity than we need. Now, this is based on a reference case, so the sector from GRIDCO, from ECG, from VRA sat together and put together what was the most likely demand scenario going forward. But there's also a high case where the demands go somewhat higher. You can see the excess is somewhat constrained with this additional demand. But even so, we do have about 500 megawatts excess on top of a 20% reserve margin. There's some question whether even 20% reserve margin is too high. So the picture is clear. We have more generation than we need. So let's look at capacity additions. Now, if we have more than we need, why are we adding capacity? So there are a number of reasons why we are still adding capacity. One of them is that we've already signed up to projects. ECG has a number of power purchase agreements that it has committed itself to. And you've probably heard both this government and the past one talking about renegotiating and delaying and canceling some of them. So that is one of the things that is being done. But delaying only means that they will still come, but later than was planned. So that's one of the reasons why there is still some capacity addition, in spite of the overcapacity that we are facing. We also have some commitments on climate mitigation. A lot of people keep promoting solar and other renewable technologies. There are reasons why we need to, if you like, decarbonize further our power sector. So there's some need to bring in more solar generation, wind generation, hydro generation, and in the case of Pwalugu in particular, it has benefits other than just power generation, flood mitigation, and irrigation as well. So that's another reason why we will still have some capacity additions. Importantly, however, these climate change mitigation commitments have not had any significant effect on the plan that has been developed. And that is because the cost of renewables continues to drop. So basically, when we have the overcapacity, it means we'll pay for the capacity whether we use it or not. But if we don't use the plants, obviously we don't have to spend money on fuel to generate power. So what happens is that where the renewable generation is able to give us energy at a price that is less than the cost of the energy to generate power with the plants we're already paying for, then there is benefit in bringing in these renewable technologies, even though it means that a corresponding plant will sit idle. So where solar becomes competitive, even with excess generation, we will consider bringing them on board. So that's the three reasons why we will still have additional capacity. We have to bear in mind that we have excess gas as well. So we have to be careful when we do that, but we'll come to that. Then there are also some transmission improvements which we need to make. We used to think that it was only generation that caused doomsday or caused outages. But in recent times, we have become more and more aware that our transmission grid is also challenged. And so there's a need to also invest in our transmission sector to ensure that the power that is generated can reliably be transmitted to the load centers. So in line with all these, the Power Sector Master Plan came up with a build plan, which has been termed the least regrets plan. I won't go into the details of how it was developed, but essentially it looks at multiple scenarios, so both high cost, low cost, high demand, low demand, looking at oil prices being higher than expected, looking at drought situations where hydro is challenged. And under all those scenarios, overall, this build plan is the one which came out as the least cost overall. Now you'll see that in up to 2021, we are not supposed to add anything. But that takes into account the 3 plants which are already under construction. Then we add some a small hydro, which is probably Pwalugu and maybe one other. And then there's some transmission infrastructure investments. We have solar and wind, mainly renewables, right up till 2030, where we have the first combined cycle coming into place. So we have about 280 megawatts here and another 1,000 here, which is when we can begin to take on new generation capacity. So until roughly 2030, 2033, we do not need to contract any thermal generation. And the emphasis is on need. So that's the outlook. Then I'll talk about some disruptive technologies. First of them is distributed generation. I guess many of us know what that is, but just to explain that we are talking about small, grid-connected generation. Mainly solar, but it could be wind, it could be biogeneration, waste-to-energy. And it's located within the distribution network. So we bypass GridCo, we go straight to ECG, to NETCO, to PDS, to NETCO. And it could even also be located within a customer premise. So for instance, Unilever has a generation plant within its premises built by Gensa, which is supplying their power needs. Some gold mines have Gensa also providing power for them within their premises. Now, where they are connected to the distribution network at the same time, this is embedded generation because it will supply their needs, but it could also supply needs for people outside those premises. The main thing is that it lowers the cost of supply to the customer. So that's the attraction to the customer. If nothing else, you don't have to pay for transmission costs. But the problem with this is that it's a whole lot more difficult to plan. Because as soon as somebody decides that, actually, I think I'd like to generate power of myself, they don't come through GridCo, they don't come through Energy Commission to say, this is what we are planning to do in 5 years' time, 3 years' time, 2 years' time. It happens. And so planning is somewhat thrown into some risk because GridCo may invest in a substation and then find out 2 years later that the power is not flowing in its to an extent that justifies the investment. So we have stranded assets, and the economics on which the whole power system is based is somewhat challenged. So you have to look at it again. Our friends from PRC will have to redo all their calculations to how they are going to bill us or do the tariffs for us, because the utilities would still have to recover their costs under this new sector. So things will need to change. The other thing is electric vehicles. We've all heard that some countries are talking about banning combustion vehicles in the near future or the not too distant future. Some car plants have announced that they'll be going purely electric somewhere in the future. So things are definitely changing. But in the light of our excess capacity, there's reason for us to sort of accelerate adoption. We have electricity capacity sitting there. We have generation capacity we are not using, but we are paying for it. So the Energy Commission is embarking on an initiative to introduce and promote electric vehicles. So we are looking at possibly electric buses for public transport or even electric cars. The idea is to launch a smart drive program possibly next month, work on having a couple of charging stations built so that we can facilitate both private and commercial people bringing in electric vehicles. Obvious reason to utilize the redundant power generation capacity, but also replace oil imports to increase power generation. So this is a win-win from the government point of view, as well as contributing to climate change mitigation. Less combustion engines, less carbon dioxide put into the environment. And think about all this. A few years ago, we're trying to reduce demand. We're talking about bringing down the peak demand. So times have changed. So let's move to the gas sector. Again, I'll look at a supply-demand balance. And surprise, surprise, we also have an excess of gas. With the completion of the OCTP project, which we've all heard about, suddenly we have about 180 million standard cubic feet of gas available to us, but not only available to us, if we don't use it, we still have to pay for it. So we have virtually the same situation as we have in the power sector. Now, based on a base projection, this is before any attempt to mitigate the problem is taken into effect. If we just allowed all the contracts as they stand without trying to do anything, we would have an excess of about 550 million standard cubic feet. And this is particularly because we also have contracts to import LNG. That's liquefied natural gas. And by definition, those are also effectively take-or-pay commitments. Tema LNG is currently building or beginning the breakwater improvements at the Tema Harbor to bring in LNG. So these will, of course, create a huge financial burden. Fortunately, this is like a worst-case scenario. It's hopefully will not materialize. On a regional basis, however, we have oversupply in the Western region because all our domestic fields are in the Western region. But Tema is still short of gas. We are doing a reverse flow to bring some of that gas through the West African gas pipeline to serve the generation plants in Tema. But as the demand in Tema increases, it justifies investments in east to west pipeline onshore, and I believe Ghana Gas is working on that already. So hopefully that imbalance between east and west will, in future, be eliminated. So you don't need to look at the numbers because these numbers keep changing, but this is essentially the analysis that gave us the somewhat 550 million standard cubic feet. And it's mainly because we have both Sankofa and 2 LNG projects coming on stream as planned. Now, this is not likely to happen. Things are being adjusted. There are some initiatives being done to move away from this extreme situation. But this is just to paint the picture that some of the contracts that we enter into have implications which need to be looked at overall. So one of the things which, if you like, has created this scenario is some of the projections on power consumption were slightly out of, or did not materialize. With the tariff increase in 2016, there was some drop in demand, and Dumsor itself did take a toll on our industrial output. So basically, some generation that was expected is not there. Hopefully we can recover that, and this picture will not be as bad as we see. However, there are some short-term actions that we are looking at. There are efforts to reduce the OCTP take-or-pay volumes. There's some plans to look at delaying development of non-associated gas fields. So there are some additional gas fields which are yet to come on stream, which we have some latitude on. The big one, of course, is delaying the LNG development. And again, that is one of the things that we are looking at. Medium to long-term actions, of course, is to stimulate economically viable, high-value, non-power use of gas. And I'm sure Ghana Gas will tell us more about that. But there are a number of initiatives to look at stimulating gas demand. The Energy Commission specifically is looking at bringing in compressed natural gas for transport as well. So we've talked about electric vehicles. Possibly in the next year or so, we'll be looking at how to bring in compressed natural gas for vehicular use as well, replacing mainly diesel engines. So again, there's mitigation in place, and those numbers would, I didn't give you any numbers because in a sense we are still working at it. So where are we going? As the song says, heaven knows where we are going. But there are a number of indicators. Everything at the end of the day moves down to price. We don't have shortages. We have excess. So that's one good thing. The only problem with excess is that it can be very expensive. So there are a number of things which are exerting an upward pressure on pricing. So we've talked about redundant capacity on both gas and electricity. We also have heard about expensive PPAs. So we have some expensive supplies of both gas and electricity. The Sankofa gas is pretty expensive. There is some effort to try and deal with that, but that is the reality. We have some stranded distribution and transmission assets potentially with increase in solar self-generation. And there are fears that with the coming of PDS, private sector is going to push up prices by bringing all costs to the open and maybe, should I say, trying to exaggerate some of those costs. These are the upward pressures. But there are also some pointers for lower energy prices. One of the most important is increased consumption due to economic growth. And this could potentially even wipe out the excess. Competitive procurement is one of the things which we need to insist upon, particularly in future generation projects. So the methodology in the past has been to sit in a room with the prospective power supplier and try to do value for money and make sure we get a good deal. Basically, it hasn't really worked for us. So we are pushing more for competitive procurement where the private sector has to compete with each other to supply us power, and hopefully that will bring our prices down. Again, innovation and technology should drive down prices. And finally, on the plus side for bringing in PDS, we expect that efficiency gains will also bring down costs. As our losses go down and the frequency of outages go down, the strain on their transformer assets and all that is also reduced. So, in summary, we know we will. That is, get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nidaku Asante, for discussing the perspectives of the future energy sector. I think it's covered quite a number of areas. What I would like you to do is to note whatever comments or questions you have. So at the end of all the presentations, then we will take your questions and comments. So please note them down, and then we would provide some opportunity for that. We would move on to the future of power generation in Ghana. Those in charge of planning have given us their perspective. But what about those who are actually doing the generation, who have to look for money to build plants? What are their plans? And to do that, we have Engineer Abdul Noor Wahab. He is the manager for system planning for the Volta River Authority. He's an engineer with over 18 years of post-graduation experience. He holds an MBA in finance as well. And so he can deal with the numbers, both from the engineering perspective and from the finance perspective. And so if you are ready, let's welcome him with a round of applause. Engineer Wahab.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm coming to present the future of power generation in Ghana, and our perspective will be from the operator's perspective. The presentation that was earlier on done was looking at it from the perspective of the regulator. We'll look at it from the perspective of the operator. And some of the areas that Energy Commission highlighted, I will just skip them and focus on some of the issues that I want to bring to the attention of this forum. So this is the outline of the presentation. We'll give an overview of the power sector. We mentioned a number of institutions, Energy Commission, VRA, PURC, all that, GRIDCO. We'll give an overview for us to have an appreciation of where all these agencies sit. Then we'll look at the current power generation situation in Ghana, the demand outlook, and then some of the issues that will confront us going into the future. So this is by way of overview. We have on the top of this line, we are looking at those in charge of policy and regulation. So you have the Ministry of Energy that is in charge of policy. Then you have this Energy Commission and Public Utility Regulatory Commission. They are in charge of regulation. Energy Commission is a technical regulator. The PURC, that is Public Utility Regulatory Commission, is a commercial regulator. Then you have the operators down here. When you come here, you have the generators, you have Bui Power Authority, you have the private participants, you have Volta River Authority, you have Car Power, AXA, all these are generators in the country. They are independent power producers. Then you have GRIDCO sitting in the middle, responsible for transmission. Then you have distribution down, NEDCO, responsible for distribution in the northern part of the country. You have ECG, now PDS, and then you have Enclave Power Company. So this long chain, anything that happens either here or there, the consumer who is down here, either a residential consumer, a commercial customer, or an industry will see an impact here. So this is just to help us have an appreciation of where all these institutions and agencies sit. So these are the people that we deal directly with, the distribution companies. In terms of the power supply market, the market or the way you are able to procure electricity is grouped into two main categories. We have the regulated market and deregulated market. Regulated market, the cost of electricity to the consumer is determined by the PURC. So you have the distribution companies, their tariff is determined by the PURC. So you have, again, PDS, now ECG, now PDS, and NEDCO, and then Enclave Power Company. These are the three main distribution companies in the country. Then we have deregulated market. The deregulated market, we have a number of mining companies there. In this market, you do your own direct regulation with a discussion or negotiation with the customer. The regulator doesn't come in. Whatever price you agree on, it is between the two of you, and you are at liberty to agree on any price. So you have a number of mining companies, you have industries, you have Valco, and then you have export to Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, and then Cote d'Ivoire. So again, this is by way of overview, and this is the kind of market that we have in the country. For current power generation situation in Ghana, I won't dwell on that because Energy Commission has highlighted that, so I'll skip these slides, and then I'll rather focus on the challenges that is confronting us. Energy Commission mentioned that we have overcapacity, yet from time to time, the light goes off. There are issues here and there. These are some of the major issues that from the generator point of view, these are some of the issues that are confronting us. We have issues with reliability of gas supply, inadequate gas volumes in the eastern enclave of the power sector. Even though we have enough in the west, when you go to the east, we don't have adequate gas there. We have challenges with the CD dollar exposure. The tariff is determined in cedis, and the CD dollar, most of our inputs is dollar-based. So as the CD dollar rate changes, it has an impact on us. We have a number of financial challenges in the sector. The structure of the tariff itself, we think we need to take a look at it. And then issues with RE, that is self-generation. When we experienced Dumso, a lot of people decided to be independent of the grid, and they decided to install their own solar systems. That is also having an impact on the power sector. This is supply of natural gas from Nigeria. This is how it looks like on a daily basis. And we have power plants that are supposed to be dispatched to make use of this gas. Typically, this is what we are expecting from Nigeria. This is how it behaves. And on average, instead of 120, we are recording an average since 2011 to February 2019, we are looking at an average of about 48 instead of 120. And on a daily basis, we are confronted with this situation, and we have to deal with it. This is a supply of natural gas from Ghana Gas. That is better than Nigeria, but it is also up and down, and we have to deal with it. In terms of volumes, it's fine, but it is also up and down. I made mention of the inadequate gas volumes in the eastern part of the country. We have a total of about 1,080 megawatts of LCO and natural gas-fired power plants in the eastern enclave of the power sector. As we speak, another 360 megawatts is under construction or is under commissioning. We are expecting it to be online somewhere in May. Meanwhile, the gas that we get is just enough to dispatch about 280 megawatts of generation capacity. So all this capacity cannot be dispatched because of the inadequate gas volumes that we have there. So we realize that because of this, you have capacity sitting there, but you cannot make use of it. And what that does is that it puts pressure on our hydropower plants. Because you see this huge capacity, you cannot dispatch it, and you always have to fall on the hydro, which is Akosombo, to make up for the shortfalls there. But what we know is that efforts are being made to enable gas transfer from the west to the east, and that hopefully will address this challenge. This is the issue that I raised with the CD dollar exposure. This is from, I think 2000 or so to 2017 or thereabout. And this is the exchange rate. This is how the exchange rate has been behaving. And this is how the tariff is adjusted. So the tariff is adjusted, it stays for some time. There's a major tariff review, it goes up and down. But in between, this is what happens to the exchange rate. So even though the tariff is adjusted, we have to deal with all these spikes in the exchange rate. And that actually affects our cost of operation. Cash flow issues. Ghana Gas may mention this issue, but I'll mention it so that this is a defensive tactic, so that they don't attack us. We are indebted to Ghana Gas by $750 million US. Yes. The simple reason is that the revenues or it's mainly gas used by the AmeriPower plant. The payment for power supplied by the AmeriPower plant is supposed to be paid by ECG, the then ECG. ECG pays enough. The tariff structure of the AmeriPower plant is broken into capacity, that's a fixed component, and energy, the variable component. What ECG pays is just enough to take care of the capacity. And in the agreement for the AmeriPower plant, the responsibility of fuel is that of Government of Ghana for fuel supply. So once the operator is paid the capacity charge, he's happy because he's gotten his investment. Fuel is not his concern. The amount of money that we are paid is just enough to pay for the capacity. So you pay Ameri capacity. Fuel is not paid for. So until we are given enough money by the distribution company to cover both the capacity and energy, it will be difficult for us to also have money to pay for the gas. So that is the simple reason why this debt is there. What we know is that there's this arrangement for inter-utility debt matrix that is handled by the Government of Ghana, where you look at ECG, you are owing VRA this amount, VRA, you are owing Ghana Gas and all that. So that hopefully is going to be used to settle some of these issues. And we also know that ECG struggles to pay in full the IPPs currently in operation. And some of the reasons are because of forex exposure. The tariff, some of the assumptions that were made in the tariff were not realized. We're expecting car power to be running on natural gas now. They are still running on HFO. So all that is taking a hit on the distribution company, and it's all having an impact on the cash flows in the sector. The structure of the tariff itself. Our tariff is energy-based. So if you make use of 100 units of electricity, you just multiply, if your tariff is 10 cents or 10 pesos, you multiply by 10 pesos, that is how much you pay. But we are dealing with this arrangement in the past was just VRA, energy-based, only one generator. So when we operate and then we send a bill, whatever you've used, you make payment for it. But what is happening now is that we have IPPs. Their tariff structure is different. They have a fixed component and a variable component. Our tariff is energy-based. So what happens is that if the IPP declares availability, that is, if the plant is available, he has to be paid, whether he runs or not. Meanwhile, your electricity tariff structure is based on the assumption that you get paid only when you supply electricity. So what happens when an IPP, which is an international practice, it is not just peculiar to us, once he has made some investment on a monthly basis, he will bring you a bill for the plant being available. And if he generates electricity, he brings you also another bill for the electricity that he has supplied, for the fuel that he has used to generate the electricity. So if your tariff assumption is based on the fact that you produce electricity and you are paid, then what happens if the operator declares availability and doesn't run? So there is, something that has to be tweaked there. But we know PURC is doing a tariff study, and hopefully that will address that problem. I made mention of during the Doomsor era when people decided to resort to solar generation in their homes. Now, what happens is that those who use those solar systems, they want to use the grid as backup. There are times they will be supplying power to the grid. There are times they are taking power from the grid. And there are commercial issues there. There's a need to have a net metering system where you know how much has gone into the grid, how much you have given to the grid, and how much you've taken from the grid. It's a good arrangement, but there are still, we need to have the right metering systems and the right policies to govern it. So these are some of the issues that are confronting us today as we operate. Now, going into the future, what are some of the issues that we think needs to be addressed? This is our view of how the gas demand is going to look like going into the future. In terms of issues, what we think is that there are currently, as we speak, there are adequate, gas provisions in place. We have indigenous gas, we have LNG initiatives going on, we have some gas coming from Nigeria. However, what we think needs to be done is that we need to properly coordinate all these initiatives so that we get the timings right. Otherwise, we will end up, paying for gas that we don't need. So LNG is needed, indigenous gas is available. However, they require proper coordination to get the timings of all these initiatives right. Some of the key issues going into the future. As we speak, the Ghana Grid Company is developing the wholesale electricity market. The market documents are still being developed, and it is important that we get it right. We get the right kind of market for our system, not a system that is being implemented in some other country that we just go and pick, but we get something right for Ghana. But even if we get the market system right, the success of that market seriously depends on the liquidity of the power sector and having the right settlement rules in place and also enforcing those settlement rules. Otherwise, we'll have the market, but that market will collapse. It cannot be implemented. We still face forest risk, and we may end up paying more for electricity just because if we are enforcing the market, commercial rules of the market, we may end up paying more for electricity just because of the forex exposure. Financing of new projects. Currently, we depend a lot on the government to finance projects, but we think it is important that utilities are allowed to have a strong balance sheet so that they are able to bring on additional generation capacity as and when needed in a timely manner. We need to prevent a situation where we do panic procurement. Typically, as a country, if you check our history, we always bring in additional generation when we are in power crisis. And in that state, you are in a position of weakness. You don't have any strong negotiation power. You are in darkness. The person you are negotiating with knows that all the citizens are on you to bring back electricity. So power that you can procure for 3 cents, you say 7 cents. And you are disadvantaged. You take it like that just because you want to manage public sentiments. But when you have enough power and you know that typically additional generation, the life cycle, you are looking at a period of about 5 years. So if I'm in 2020 and I need power in 2025, I start working on it in 2020. You are in a very strong position to negotiate. You can get prices at a very low, at very low levels, rather than when you are in darkness and you are negotiating for power. You won't get any good deal. So going into the future, that is one major area that we need to look at. Fuel supply security. I mentioned the reliability. It is important that we address the reliability. And again, I'm bringing up the issue of the LNG augmentation. We need to get the timing right. Otherwise, we end up with more gas that we don't need. And if we want to procure generation, we have to procure them efficiently. Let's do competitive tenders, as Energy Commission said, and through that we can get good tariffs. So in conclusion, over the years, the power sector of Ghana has evolved. We have enough generation to meet, enough generation capacity to meet demand, but we still have a number of issues that needs to be addressed. And hopefully, if we address them right, the future will be bright for the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Wahab. He spoke from the perspective of a generator, and you saw a difference. So please take down your points, your questions, your comments, and there will be a time for the discussion. I'm not very sure I heard a loud clap when he finished. Thank you. I got the impression you were depressed with the issues. We move on to look at the gas infrastructure master plan for Ghana. And we are very fortunate today to have the CEO himself of Ghana Gas. That's how important he takes this conference and this subject. Indeed, he has so many other engagements, but he's put them on the back burner to be here with us. And so, for that subject, Gas Infrastructure Master Plan, I'll soon invite Dr. Ben Asante, CEO of Ghana Gas. Now, this is somebody who has been in the oil and gas sector for a better part of more than 35 years since graduation as a chemical engineer. And so you'll be hearing from someone who knows the subject very well. And so I ask that your clap be even louder this time. So Dr. Ben Asante, Gas Infrastructure Master Plan for Ghana.
Thank you very much. All right. Back and forth. Yeah, good morning again. And it's a real honor to be invited to this forum. I almost missed out. No, this is something that I think I have to make a presence at. So thank you again, the organizers, for inviting me, and also by extension inviting Ghana Gas. I think before I even go into my presentation, if you were a little bird on the wall there, and if you were summarizing the first two presentations, you'll probably be wondering, with respect to gas, whether we have more or whether we have less. I think the answer really lies in between there. And when you're talking about gas, it's not a matter of just magnitude. This is the volume of your supply and demand. You would have to take those into consideration. Okay. My perspective is we are just about right. I think really depending on the timing, you have a little more or a little less. Infrastructure also is critical in making sure that you do a balance between locations, like they both mentioned. East is anemic with respect to gas supply because of the intermittency of what we get from Nigeria. But West is awash with a lot of gas supply, domestic supply that is. So we need to get infrastructure that will do reverse transport of the gas from the West to the East. And that's happening. So within a month or so, that will be complete. So we wouldn't leave here with the notion that we are kind of swimming in this gas that we don't know what to do with. I think we definitely do know what to do with the gas. Thanks. Now let me go on to my presentation. Gas master plan. I'll explain what a master plan is. I think what I want to do is first to go along the entire gas value chain. What value chain is, and you look at the upstream side, which essentially is your exploration and production, and that's where your supply plan is. And then I will talk about the midstream, the gathering, processing, and transmission. And then, of course, we'll talk about downstream, which is the distribution and utilization of gas. But after your plan, you also need drivers for that plan. How do you get that plan accomplished? So I'll talk about the enablers of the plan very quickly as well. Then, as with any jurisdiction, you need some legal backing, legal teeth to both your plan and your enabling activities. So a gas act needs to be put in place as well. What is a master plan? Quite simply, it's really a comprehensive strategy or scheme for achieving an objective. That's and it could apply to anything, from a football team, a political agenda, whatever it is. Just a comprehensive strategy or scheme for achieving an objective. That's really all a plan is. Why do we do it? I remember as a young engineer over in Canada in the mid-'80s, I think I was part of the planning team, the gas planning team over in Calgary. And it was very clear to me that the planning that we were doing had two objectives. One on the design side, which is the facility side, and the other certainly on the operation side, essentially minimum cost. So for a master plan, on the facility side, you just want to identify the most cost-effective solution to meet market demand. And then if you look down, once you have your infrastructure in place, then your objective really is to minimize your operating cost. So that's really what the plan objectives really are. Again, if you don't remember anything I say, just memorize this slide. That really captures the entire plan or the entire industry, if you will. Let's look here. This is the supply end. This is the demand end. So this is where your gas really is produced. You have domestic sources, you have imports, both regional and, of course, LNG. Then this is your demand. That's what you can use gas all for, okay? Then anything between that is trying to link your supply source to your market is the infrastructure. The infrastructure in the gas science really are two key areas. One of processing and one of transportation. Okay, so what you have here really is a gas processing plant, if you will, but you gather the gas from all sources. Some could be offshore, some could be onshore. Offshore, they could be very close, but you need a gathering facility to bring it to that processing outfit. Okay, and of course you get some products, natural gas liquids coming out of your processing. Then these are the facilities, I'm going to them. Then, of course, you have the transmission line. The transmission lines actually take the pooled gas. Usually, it's a bigger inch diameter pipe compared to your gathering or even your distribution system. Your gathering lines are dedicated to the source of gas. Then they're all pooled to that common point. Then naturally, because of the cumulative volumes of gas that you're getting from various sources, you need a bigger inch pipeline to transport the aggregate of gas down to the market. And that's really what is happening here. You need a transmission facility, and you have regulation and then metering facility, and then, of course, you distribute it to all the end users. That's really a capture of the gas industry. I could have stopped here, but I'll continue so you know what really is behind this. So the framework really, yes, get a master plan together, a plan that has got aggregates of supply plan, a demand plan, and infrastructure plan. The three of them principally make up the master plan for the gas. The supply, the market or demand, as well as the infrastructure. And I mentioned the infrastructure links the supply and demand. Then, of course, you talk about the enabling factors as well, the drivers of those plans. The institutional framework, which institution is responsible for aggregation of gas? Which institution is responsible for operatorship? Which institution is responsible for the sale of gas? We need to have clarity on those if you need to drive these plans successfully. And I think we still have some work to do here. Then the regulatory agencies as well, both technical and financial. So Energy Commission, PRC, all those. And then, of course, we need to encourage private sector participation, easy access to finance. You need to install your infrastructure, you need some money. And you have to make sure you have the enabling environment that will help you get the necessary finance for your infrastructure. Then local content provision, capacity building. Then importantly also, you need some community relations depending on where your facilities are. Then the utilization plan. Utilization plan typically drives your demand. Then the Gas Act. So let's walk through those. A master plan. Let's start with the supply and demand. I think you heard earlier on from Nida Akon. I think I would have a little bit of contradiction to what he said, but I would explain why. When you have supply and demand, again, I mentioned magnitude is not enough. Just saying we have 150 or 250 is not enough. Where is it located and the timing? Because you cannot use a coincidence of maximums to say that, okay, we're going to have 600 or 800. It hardly happens. You don't have a coincidence of maximum flows from the various fields. It really differs as you go on. So in planning, we take account of that, the probability of occurrence of a particular flow from a particular source. So that's what we do. That's what I don't think we do a very good job of. Usually a supply plan, and take your mind back to my pom-pom model that I showed you. The supply plan over there, you looking at exploration and production for that matter. And then, so it's based on reserve studies and well deliverability data. You establish production from both the 3 Ps, that is the proven, probable, and possible reserves. We do some economic analysis to see whether even these fields have good recoverability. If they are not economically recoverable, we could shut in those wells, but they have to be before we can produce them. Then we typically, and we should, have cases, because we are not certain of the production rates and the production profile over the years. So to address those uncertainties, we do a high, medium, and low flow cases. And typically you would do about 10 years. Beyond that, it gets a little hazy, and your predictability becomes a little bit uncertain. And I make a point here that if you have 1 trillion cubic feet of gas in place, in a bucket, if you will, you could produce it at a rate of 140 million standard cubic feet per day for 20 years. 20 years is just 7,300 days. So if you have 1 TCF, you can do the math. This is not gas science. This is just arithmetic. So you can produce it at that rate. And it's quite significant. I think if you look at what we have as a nation, we're looking at close to about 10 TCF in place, 5 to 10. My friend Joe is here. He would tell me, the MD of Cosmos. But not all will be recoverable. So if you do about 40, 50, or 30%, you're still in very good shape. So that's really what it is. Let's look at where our basins are. Oh, sorry. So this is where we are. Most of our gas, domestic gas, is coming from offshore. The Tullow Cosmos fields, which is the Jubilee, and then 10. And then, of course, we have the Sankofa ENI fields also coming through. We are working on the Voltaine Basin as well. That will be the first onshore gas reserves that we potentially could have. That covers about 60% or so of our land mass. And if we get some gas onshore, I think it would be very helpful. We don't have to worry so much about all the hardships of doing marine production, and certainly doing even what we call hyperbaric welding, as welding at high pressure. These you could do onshore, but I think we are just at the 2D stage of the Voltaine Basin discovery. So these are the ranges that have been given in terms of gas supply. Domestic Jubilee, about that. 10, about that. This could go to about 80. I'm informed. Sankofa, about this. Aker, it's not really coming now. I think I was in Oslo with the finance minister not too long ago. And what they've decided to do now is really to re-inject the gas for enhanced oil recovery. So Aker gas will not be coming anytime soon. If it will, it probably will be towards the mid-20s to the late 20s. Regional, which really is WACP gas, about 3 to 20. Engineer Wahab just mentioned that they've been averaging around 48. There are times that it's like as close to 10 or something. 2 weeks ago, it was just 18, really, that was coming through. But other times, it jumped to 75. So that is another point really to be made. We always do classify gas supply in terms of the service type. So we have 2 main types of service: interruptible or firm service. So interruptible service usually have a take or pay obligation. So whether you take the gas or not, you pay for it. Sorry, the firm service. The interruptible, you usually don't have take or pay. So both the off-taker and the provider of the gas really have no obligation to take or deliver the gas. You do not plan around interruptible supply. Okay, and if you do, I mean, it becomes very risky. You have to do your plans around firm. Still have your eyes on the interruptible. Say that well, and you can do your own historical analysis to see the frequency of supply over time and say that, okay, even though I don't have a firm contract with a supply source, over the years, I see that I still have good supply from them. So I can do some planning around it, but still entertain the risk that if one day they come and say, no, for the next week or 2, we are not going to be supplying you gas, I have to find alternative fuel. I make the point, and I think currently, the only firm supply sources that we have really is from ENI. That is the only one that contractually we are obliged to take. We used to be contractually bound to take the WACP gas. But Nigeria basically told us that their priority now is to their own domestic supply obligation. So you cannot plan around that. So that's why you see the intermittency in the supply that Engineer Wahab showed you. So we have to make sure that we hang our hats on firm supply, firm gas supply. And that's what we intend to do. So this is really the supply plan. But again, don't just add these maximum numbers and say we've excess supply. It's a range, and also timing is critical as well. This was a report by the NDPC. I happened to be the consultant who was contracted to do the petroleum and gas report for the National Development Planning Committee, I think about a couple of years ago. And for the gas side, this was what we were looking at in terms of the 30-year forecast. So this is the high case, the medium case, and the mid case. Now, this is really not a plateau. I think really depending on the reservoir characteristics, this potentially will come through unless you drill some infill wells to really maintain the plateau. But essentially, these ones were quite representative of what we were looking at. Okay. Again, the low, medium, and high case. So that's the supply. The domestic part that I was talking about, the regional part coming from WACP and Nigeria for that matter, and then also LNG imports. LNG imports really is to make up for the difference between what your demand is and really what your supply projections are, both domestically and regionally. So there shouldn't be a case of oversupply unless you, of course, overcontract. So the demand case or the demand requirements, just like the supply, is also based on end user requirements. So what are we going to be using the gas for? Power generation, other industries, both agrochemical and petrochemical, and in some cases, residential and commercial for basically space heating. And then you look at your historical demand and your growth potential. Most people who actually do market forecasting look at the GDP because they try to align your energy provision or your energy availability with your GDP. So we do look at your GDP growth and map that to that. And again, because you want to address uncertainties and you have to get your arms around that uncertainty, you do a high, medium, and low case. You hardly put a number there and say, hey, the demand here is 250. No, that is not like an engineer. See, that is un-engineering. You have to make sure that you admit that there's some uncertainties in that, and you plan for those uncertainties. So to do that, you address the fact that these would be covered by probability cases. So when it does happen or does not happen, at least you have it encapsulated within those boundary conditions. But if you just said it's 250 and it's 251, you are wrong. Okay? So we do actually have error bounds associated with our predictions. This is what we use gas for. This is really what drives the demand. So gas could be mostly for energy and also as feedstock. We are not at a stage where we have excess gas to be doing LNG. So we are a net importer. I was in Nigeria and I was making the point to them. Compared to Ghana, Nigeria's gas reserves are close to about 200 TCF. That is 200 trillion cubic feet of gas in place. And I did make a point that for their population close to about 200 million, each of them actually has about 1 million cubic feet of gas, and they should go to the government to go and claim that. See? But a greater point that was made was that even with our comparatively lower gas reserves, about 5 TCF, we've been able to manage it quite well, that our electricity penetration was much higher than theirs. It's incredible, you know, that they could have so much gas, and of course oil reserves for that matter, but they are still plunged into darkness ever so often. So we have to be, I think we deserve a clap for ourselves as a nation. There's still, I understand, there's still some ways to go, But I tell you, sometimes we beat our heads too much. You know, we have to do better, but we have to recognize our successes as well. If you don't, you wouldn't be buoyed up enough to do even better, because you always paint this picture of gloom and doom and entertain all these imaginary fears, which may not be there. Okay? So let's look at the brighter picture sometimes. This is what, in words, we use gas for. Industrial heat, I mentioned all these. CNG have been mentioned by my friends as well, my colleagues who presented as well. Compressed natural gas for vehicular transport. Ammonia and all this really for fertilizer. Methanol, dimethyl ether, and other petrochemicals. It's a lot you can use gas for. This was the demand forecast by the National Development, NDPC, well, National Development Planning Committee. And this was, I think, a 30 or 35-year forecast all the way to 2047. So when you look at what has been forecasted for supply, and you look at what is forecasted for demand, this is the imbalance. And the imbalance was represented as this. Okay. Now, this is the imbalance that really reflects maybe imports. So this is what you have to import, really, to make up for the difference between supply and demand. And you could use LNG. I think LNG is probably the popular one to use. I would have preferred regional supply to make up for our local imbalance, but it just ain't happening. And Nigeria believes they have priority. Their priority is their DSO, domestic supply obligation. That is it. So we cannot rely on that. Okay. So LNG, it's also a firm service. You take or you pay, and you do not have to overcontract. And I think that is what we have to be careful of. So I've talked about the supply side, domestic, regional, and LNG. I've also given an indication of the demand, what we use gas for, what our projections for the future is. Then what is the infrastructure then that will link supply to demand? And these are the hard facilities. And these hard facilities are for processing, I mentioned gathering, transmission, and distribution. Let's look at them very quickly. Your gas processing scheme really looks like this. I think those of you who are process engineers would pick that up very quickly. I've been complaining to Kwabena that, look, we have to try and see that there are more process engineers in really what we do, because all I hear are the electricals, the civils, and mechanicals, and it looks like the chemicals and the others are kind of lost through it. So, but process scheme really looks like this. The gas comes in, the gas comes off, let's say the Jubilee gas, it comes off as wet gas. Wet gas is received as a bit of conditioning over here, then it goes to the liquid recovery stage. And the key facility here is the Joule-Thomson valve. The Joule-Thomson valve essentially brings the gas from a high pressure to a low pressure, and with that drop in pressure, there's a drop in temperature, and that is where your liquid recovery is. This is not the only scheme we can use in terms of liquid recovery. We also can use a turbo expansion. Again, that also lowers, and as a matter of fact, your liquid recovery efficiency for turbo expansion is twice as much as that you use for Joule-Thomson. Ghana Gas, at our plant over at Atuabo, I think because we're in a little bit of a hurry, because the Joule-Thomson valve can be procured quite quickly. Turbo expander would take some time, some shop tests and all that before you do it. So it was a little rush through. So we have a JT valve for the liquid recovery before you certainly go into the fractionation stage. So you have arrested all the liquid from the gas. It is a bulk liquid. You do fractionation to put them in the various commercial fractions, LPG, pentanes, and condensates, okay, through your distillation columns, if you will. So this is also a very critical stage of it. But once you do this, then you put them in storage tanks and then sell them. It's a very simple process. First, gas-liquid separation. Then you take the bulk liquid and put that bulk liquid in the various commercial fractions. LPG, condensates and pentanes. If you want to go even further, you can actually put them in the pure components. So you have all these columns, de-ethanizer, de-propanizer, and all that. So you put them in their fine, pure components. So you have propane, butane, both isomeric form, also in the normal form, pentanes as well. So you have all those. Then you can recombine them in whatever commercial fraction that you want and sell. That's all we do at Atwabo. Take the wet gas, extract the liquids, then bring the liquids aside, then fractionate them into various commercial fractions. That's all we do. And it looks like this physically. Our plant. And these are the results that you get. So you bring that raw gas, which is wet there, and these are the fractions. About 90% of our gas goes to VRA for power generation. That is the lean gas. So with that, you've extracted the liquids from it. Remember, if the gas comes from the fields, because it is in contact with a liquid in the reservoir, if you will. So by gravity, of course, the liquid sits and the gas on top of it. And they are dynamically exchanging components till they reach equilibrium where you would say that the gas is saturated with some liquids. So we take that saturated gas, bring it onshore, and then remove the liquids from it. And that's what we do. Okay? So 90% then still remains lean gas. 90% of that raw gas is lean. Then the rest are natural gas liquids. Natural gas liquids comprising LPGs, pentanes, and condensates. 10% of it. I think it's about 622. Just about 1.5, something like that. Very close. So that's what we do at Atwabo. And that is the distribution of the hydrocarbons that we produce. So after processing then, you have to transport. Transportation of that gas from Atwabo all the way to Takoradi is by a pipeline, a 20-inch pipeline, 111 kilometers. But the raw gas that are given to us by Tullow and their partners go through a 58-kilometer high-pressure 12-inch line. And we keep it at high pressure. So the liquid part of the gas does not condense. You have to keep it in a single phase. If you do it at normal operating pressures, you will have liquids actually fall out of stream. And then you have a two-phase situation. I did my PhD over on two-phase transport, and I tell you, it is not a joke. When you have to transport gas and liquid in the same pipeline with a discernible interface between the gas and the liquid, I think it's quite a horrendous task. So we typically maintain the gas and the liquid stream right from the wellhead in a single phase at high pressure till it gets to shore. Then we do the separation. So we don't have to worry about two-phase flow in the pipeline. So that's why the 12-inch here that we build is at high pressure, upwards about 200 bar, whilst this one is just about 100 bar. The onshore one is just about 100 bar. Okay. And these are our plans. Broken lines are our facility plans for the future. So these lines are built, the dark ones are built, and we're trying to make sure that we can supply gas to not just the power consumers, but also to the non-power consumers around the world. So our plan, the Energy Commission plan, and indeed the later one that was done by the ministry, acknowledges that we have to supply gas to not just power generation, but also for non-power, both agrochemical fertilizer, that is, and pesticides you can add, as well as the petrochemical industries. So this really are the plans for our transmission and our gathering lines. I should mention that there's the Sankofa one is also built and it's in operation. So this is what it will look like in the next, I believe, 10 years. So these ones are the ones which are existing, the blue ones. Just that's all we have so far. Now we're going to continue all the way to Kumasi with the new one. Then we're going to build an onshore one that was talked about by the earlier presenters. Then we would do one that would connect to Kumasi, then all the way to the north to supply our friends, potentially even in Burkina Faso. I sit on the ECOWAS Committee on Gas Distribution, and our plan initially was to extend the West African gas pipeline from here all the way to Ivory Coast, and also somehow get an inland one to Burkina. This one makes sense, but trying to extend the West African gas pipeline all the way to Ivory Coast, I thought was contrary to common sense. And that's simply this, because you would have to need intermediate compression, so you might have to build a compression platform in the ocean. And then also, when you do have any accidents on the pipeline, it's going to be horrendous. You all recall just about 4 years or so ago when we had an accident on the WACP system. It took 10 months for it to be repaired. 10 months. That is what plunged, in my view, VRA into near bankruptcy. 10 months, where VRA had to now, instead of using gas, had to use liquid fuel. At that time, $140 per barrel. So if we sit in a crowded place like this, you can blame that. This could have easily been extended if VRA didn't have to go through that. They are constrained financially because of an event like that. Just some pirates trying to cause mayhem, you know, and their ship, their anchor just got hold of the pipeline at the seams and just dragged it. And the pipeline got open, and that was it. 10 months before it was repaired. So offshore pipeline repairs are no jokes. Even besides the fact that, of course, it's in a marine environment and it's constantly exposed to corrosion, even though we do make some corrosion allowance for that. Okay. So this is our plan for the nation in terms of pipeline. So my suggestion to the committee over in Lomé at that time was that, look, let's use the infrastructure of the individual member countries, all 15 of us. Instead of, for instance, trying to bring gas all the way from Nigeria and going to Ivory Coast. Ghana has got some gas. Ghana can give its gas, whatever is intended from Nigeria, to Ivory Coast, and then that volume of gas will come to Ghana for use. That is a gas swap. And gas, and with gas, we have the principle of interchangeability. We look more at the heating value of the gas, more than where it's coming from. So you've got gas that has got a heating value of 1,000 BTU per SCF. Whether it's coming from Nigeria or Angola, it has still got that heating value. So it allows for you to minimize the use of infrastructure, whether in terms of new infrastructure or even compression facilities. So that's what we suggested, and I think they would take that on board. With the landlord countries, we don't have a choice. We just have to pipe gas to them. So that was the transmission system. Now the distribution system. Typically, a distribution system looks like this. This is the high pressure line. Let's say the pipeline coming from Atuabo to Takoradi. It's at high pressure. If it's got to be used, they used it usually at a much lower pressure. So they have to actually regulate the pressure down, of course, meter it before it can be used by the end user. But more importantly, you usually have to have a heater, because once it goes through regulation, the temperature drops because of Joule-Thomson effect, and which means that you would have a temperature drop with pressure drop. This is a typical or a planned distribution plan for the Tema area. So that's, again, a capture of it. I've talked about the supply, the demand, and the infrastructure plans. I'll quickly run through the plan enablers. Plan will take another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we should be done. So we've done the planning, the supply forecast, the market forecast, the infrastructure plan, both for gathering, transmission, and distribution. Now, how do you really action these plans? It's done by these plan enablers. I've talked about these already. Institutional framework, regulatory framework, and certainly all that. Private sector participation, easy access to finance, and capacity building. Very important. I've talked about this. I won't belabor it. I think essentially, who does what? You know. Then the regulatory framework, both in terms of the infrastructure and the commodity, they need to be treated differently. Financial regulation, the key thing really is to be able to have a predictable tariff regime. And that is really important, because if you don't have a structure, a tariff structure, that will incentivize investors to actually bring the gas, then it's going to be a problem for you. So you must have a predictable and realistic pricing for your commodity. The tariffs for the services are different. So I make the distinction here between the gas price, which is the commodity price, and the tariffs. The tariffs are what you pay for services. Sometimes we just jumble all of them together. Tariffs are for services, and price are for the commodity. But when you lump those together, then you have a delivered gas price for the end user. All right? So Ghana Gas, for instance, provides only services. Don't think that Ghana Gas really manufactures any gas. That gas really belongs to the state, and GNPC holds it in trust for the state. But Ghana Gas provides services of processing and transportation. Transportation both on the gathering side, the transmission side, and in the future, certainly the distribution side. So that's really what it is. This really are the components of the delivered gas price. The commodity price and all these tariffs. And then there are some levies that goes, of course, to the regulator. Talked about local content participation. Capacity building, very important. I think as stakeholders, the government should really make sure that they are part of this. Professional bodies like ours should be front and center of trying to make sure that we build the necessary capacity to sustain the industry. We cannot have people come from outside and always be doing the work for us, whether at the engineering phase, the construction phase, or even the operations phase. First thing I did when I came in as CEO of Ghana Gas was to send all the Chinese away. There were 52 of them. Say, no, go home. We're going to train our own Ghanaians to operate the plant. March 2017. That happened, yes. So we have to really take it upon ourselves to make sure that we try to have our own people actually do the work. Community relations and CSR are also very important. Then, last but not the least, you certainly do need an act. Currently, we are operating really without any legal teeth. We need that. So I think, yeah, Parliament will have to help us get that, which addresses all these issues, by the way. Okay. This is the last slide. And thanks for your patience. I think what this encapsulates is everything I talked about. This really is the gas master plan. So at the upstream end where you have your supply, your downstream where you have your market, then the midstream where you have your infrastructure. And then these are all the enabling factors that will help you. Okay. And as engineers, we do all this in the name of safety, cost effectiveness and efficiency, and also compliance with local codes and standards. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Asante. I assured you that he knew his stuff. And I don't think there's a single person here who would disagree with me. He does know his stuff. We're coming to the last presentation, the last but not the least. And that has to do with the state of the national grid. Now, if you generate, it has to be transported. And Doc mentioned the gas component in terms of transportation. The electricity part is done by Gridco, Ghana Grid Company. Gridco used to be part of VRA, and following the reforms in the sector, Gridco was established to provide unfettered access to the grid. And so we have here the Director for System Operations, and he also knows his stuff. I've known Engineer McBahn for close to 28 years. He has a BSc in electromechanical engineering, a master's in the same, and an MBA. And he's been with VRA stroke Gridco for 27 years. That's a long time. And so he also knows his stuff. Today we give you people who knew their stuff. And so let's welcome Engineer Mark Ba to discuss the state of the national grid.
Thank you very much. Okay. Sometimes when you mention those number of years, I get so scared. It just shows that we are growing old. I was shocked when a child called me grandpa. I thought I was just pa, but that's life. We are growing. Anyway, good morning. Thank you for inviting Gridco. I really hope that by the end of the presentation, you get to understand some of these things and that I don't get you depressed. But as Dr. Asante said, we need to be hopeful. I believe there are good times ahead. We just need to do the right things. So Wahaba said that we are sandwiched in between there. And the only difference, or the only thing I'll add here is that Gridco is the transmission asset owner and also the system operator. So we are actually carrying two hats. So as a transmission asset owner, it means that we need to plan and build the network. And the law actually allows in Ghana for multiple asset owners. Currently, we have a group of transmission lines, like from the Bui plant. Currently, they don't belong to Gridco. So the law allows for multiple asset owners. And we also do system operations. And system operations basically is this, making sure that we keep supply at 50 hertz. We all buy our electrical gadgets and say they should be operated at 50 hertz. We need to make sure that we are able to deliver power at 50 hertz. And to do that, you make sure that supply and demand are balanced. If you have, where's the pointer? If you have oversupply, you can have frequencies shooting up, disturbing certain gadgets, and if you have undersupply and this one goes up this way, or rather becomes too heavy, and this one starts going this way, your system can collapse. Before it collapses, your ACs, your motors will start slowing down. So we need to make sure that we are hovering around this figure. In fact, the grid code allows for 49.8 to 50.2. That is the range at which Gridco is supposed to deliver this power. So at the control center, if you come, you see that 24/7, every second, somebody is watching that figure. Because if this is going up and becoming too heavy, then you advise, I think it's going to take a while for us to know that there's PDS around. We advise them we advise them that you have to take off load in order to make this lighter so that the system will be balanced. My presentation, as Engineer Okan mentioned, is about the grid. I want as much as possible to limit our discussion to the transmission grid. But as a system operator, I might be tempted, if time allows, to talk to you about the supply situation as we are here now. So this is, as a system operator, this is what we do. So I'll just jump straight to the grid because I have just about 30 minutes. 20 minutes. Okay, that's clear. Okay. So, since 2013, we've been adding transformer capacities to the grid. The reason why we are doing that is to ensure that every substation in Ghana, transformer substation, at least meets the basic N-1 criteria. It means that you can take one transformer out, repair, do maintenance work, and customers should not be able to sense that something is happening in the system. So we've actually improved upon the transformer capacities. Transmission lines have been added, and the essence is that you want to make sure that power gets to customers with the least amount of losses. So you try to create more parallel lines in the system, which I'll show you later. So over the years, you see that the circuit kilometers of our transmission lines have been increasing. We're almost 6,000, and we are still counting. I'm not sure if this is clear enough, but if you don't know, this is the map of Ghana. Apologies to the president, but I know there are some new regions, and we'll ask the powers that be to seriously, if you ask me, I don't know where they are, where the lines are. So basically, our system is a 161 kilovolt transmission system, but that story is going to change soon. So the red lines you see here are the 161 kV transmission lines. In 1965, under the Akosombo project, here is Akosombo. So a series of lines were constructed between Akosombo and Tema for Valco. So you have these cluster of lines here. And then from Tema, the lines moved westwards towards Takoradi, and then northwards through Prestea to Kumasi, and then from Kumasi back to Akosombo. So we had this ring. And then there's a branch which went to Akwatia. I suppose that was because Akwatia had diamonds. So somewhere along the line, we decided that we need to send power to the north. So a radial line was constructed from Kumasi through Techiman to Tamale. Another one was constructed again from Techiman to Wa. So we had these B lines going to the north. And then in the northern region, at Tamale, we have a transmission line teeing off to Yendi. So that had been the power system, the transmission system. Some of the red lines, they are not coming up. This is still developed. They are not coming up. Some of them are dashed. You don't see them very well. They are projects we are thinking of. Currently, we have closed what we call the northern loop. to improve upon supply reliability to the north, so that in case of any maintenance work or outage here, some power supply can be effected on the other line. Hitherto, anytime we are doing maintenance work between Techiman and Tamale, the whole of the north must go down. And currently, we have closed the northern loop. This is the Bui power plant, and we have about 3 transmission lines coming from the Bui power plant joining the system. I think somewhere last month, Engineer Jikunu is somewhere, we had a big challenge with power supply in Brekum. Currently, the 161 kV line has been extended to, where is Brekum? Somewhere in the Brong-Ahafo region, has been extended, no, here, has been extended to Brekum. So that project has been completed. Another project which has actually been completed, and it's just like the Medina, is it the N1? The highway which has been completed, and the contractor started erecting footbridges, and left it halfway. I believe for financial reason. We have a same challenge here. There was no money for the contractor, so he built a line, left just about 2 kilometers, and packed bag and baggage. But somehow we've managed to entice him back, and he's completed the line. We are now preparing to energize this transmission line. So we are closing what we call the western, is it northwestern? The western loop here. And it's going through Juabeso to Mim, and then back to Sunyane. And that is going to improve power supply to especially the mining areas. So you have mines like Asanko and other mines who are served on radial lines, and every now and then we have problems over there just because of right-of-way issues, right-of-way clearing. And just last week, was it Asanko mine, they were off, and around 5 p.m. our linesmen had to go in line, and somebody just went and fell a tree. These illegal chainsaw. Fortunately, it was a branch of the tree which fell on the line. So the line was intact, and we had to isolate and take it off. But these are problems we face every day. So we've closed the western loop, and this is Atebubu. We were informed that there was going to be a power generating plant somewhere here using biofuel. So our intention that if that comes on, then we need to extend transmission line to Atebubu. Currently, all this large area is without 161 kV. So NETCO has to supply them at 34 or 33 kV, and you can imagine the distribution losses that go with it. We've also extended in the Volta region 161 kV up to KJB. This one is not closed yet. When the right time comes, we'll extend the line up to Yendi, and we'll have completed what we call the Eastern Loop. So that is how the 161 kV network looks like. And currently, we are interconnected with Togo Benin in Lome. So you see the lines going here. We are currently overlaying the network with a 330 kilovolt network. This line has been energized over 5 years now. It's a 330 kV line between Abuaze and the Volta substation, in fact, and Tema. We have energized the line from Volta substation to Davie in Lome. And the Togolese commissioned their part just last week. So this line is energized in order to facilitate additional exports to Togo Benin at lower transmission losses. So the coastal line is energized. What we are building now is a 330 kV transmission line from Abuaze through Prestea to Kumasi, and then to Kintampo, Tamale, and then to Bolgatanga. This is going to strengthen Ghana's network. Burkina Faso has been pushing for this because they are relying on Ghana for additional power supply. Currently, we are supplying them averagely about 60 megawatts. They need 200 megawatts. In fact, they need more, but we can only do that when this line is commissioned. I'll talk more about the 330 kV line later, but bear in mind that it is from Abuaze all the way up north. There was a plan, I'm saying there was a plan to also build a line 330 kV from Dunkwa to La Côte d'Ivoire, but we've shelved it for now because we don't have the commercial basis for that construction of that line. What we are doing now is to secure funds to construct a 330 kV transmission line from Pokuase in Accra to Kumasi so that we'll end up with a triangle, I'm saying, within the southern network. Now, so as part of this, these are some of the projects that are ongoing. And you can see the 330 kV Abuaze, Prestea, Kumasi, Bolga, Ouagadougou line. Currently, we are facilitating exports to Burkina Faso on 161 kV. And it comes at a huge cost, but they need it. On 161 kV, that means a lot of losses. In fact, last week, the Burkinabes were pushing for an additional 40 megawatts to make it 100 megawatts. But our analysis show that if we do that, we lose about 36 megawatts. So it's like you give them 100, you lose a third of that. And that doesn't make business sense because it's like you'll be losing. So they have been very impatient because we promised them that 2018 we're going to complete this line, and we are in 2019. Accra Central BSP has been energized, and it is near the opposite the Graphic Corporation, and it was a Japanese grant. This is the first 161 kV GIS substation we have in Ghana. So it's a very complicated one. And that was what started giving us the teething problems. Was it last 2 weeks when we were doing the elevation of the transmission lines at Pokuase, and people were insulting us everywhere. Okay. Accra Force Bulk Supply, this should have been completed last 2 years. There was no money for it. Thankfully, MCA, MIDA, has come to our aid, and they are completely funding this project. In fact, when we wanted to start it, we wanted to acquire the land. It was about $400,000. Yes. And at the next meeting, the owner said it was now $1 million. So we started negotiating, and at the third meeting, it became $4 million. And finally, it went to $9 million. And there was no way we could afford that. Do you know the story now? Government has taken over, and now it's now an executive instrument. Now the owner has to negotiate with government. And they say, Greco, we should come and help. We just run out. So please. So these are projects we need to do. Most of these projects are because we want to change the 1965 transmission lines that were built by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. These are very small, narrow transmission lines, and they come with a lot of losses. And we've put most of these projects at the back burner for obvious reasons, which I'll talk to you about. I'm showing these pictures for a reason. These are part of the 330 kV transmission line project. This is the Tamale control room, the Tamale 2 substation. We are building another substation in Tamale. This is the Kintampo substation. In fact, it's the most beautiful substation in Ghana. And then, yes, it is. And then the Kintampo Tamale transmission lines. Why am I showing this? If you go along the motorway, you see that new towers are being erected. We are replacing the old Mesoto lines with more robust, bigger diameter transmission lines, just because of the huge amount of power we are shipping between Tema, because Tema is a huge generation enclave, to Accra. Tema, Accra alone accounts for about 40 to 45% of Ghana's demand. So there's huge amount of power being shipped in this corridor. And that's why we are changing them. So you see these new, and they are very tall. Because we don't have any right of way, we need to bring down the old line in order to erect this. So we have sandwiched these in between two of the corridors, and they are very high up in order to create this clearance. And this is the major challenge. When we're able to do this line, we can bring down the remaining lines and at ease just construct them. So this is a very important project. And with the intention to ship power on the southern network. And if we're able to complete this and the 330 kV line, our transmission losses will come as low as about 3.2%, if we're able to do it. I hope you will clap at the next slide. This package was being financed mainly by AFD, Agence Française de Développement, I think that's the name. Following the March tariff, we were categorized as a risk. AFD decided to suspend the agreement, the financing of the projects, the 330 kV projects, and the Volta, Achimota, Malam transmission upgrade. Some of the contractors just hung on, especially the one along the motorway. He continued to do the work, hoping that AFD will resign their decision and the monies will be paid them. But after some time, when they realized that this was not going to happen, that contractor also packed bag and baggage and left. So currently, the 330 kV project has been suspended. And I must say it's left with just about less than 10% for this entire project to be completed. So the project is on hold. And AFD says that the government has to do something about it in order to make Gridco more credit-worthy. The government, thankfully, converted, the Aboise Volta line, that 330 kV line, was in the books of VNRE. So as part of the transition process, the financing package has been handed over. VNRE was very effective in handing that over. It is your baby. Take it and pay for it. So the government decided to take that on board as its equity. So that improved our financial ratios, and we thought that that was enough for AFD to come back and start financing the project. And unfortunately, AFD said it's still not enough. The government needs to do more. So as I'm speaking to you now, we are in a limbo. The Burkinabes are still piling pressure that they are in serious doomsday Okay? So they invited Gridco and said that, look, we have some money. Okay? We will loan it to you so that if you increase that supply, we'll use it to, offset. Okay? Use it to entice the contractors to come back on site. So that is what we are doing now. And the contractors have agreed that they will restart, hoping that we'll finish the work, we'll make some money, and by that time, AFD would have resigned his decision, and everything will be normal. So that is what is being done now. It's unfortunate, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. So hopefully, by September, we would have completed the work. In fact, we have now energized Prestea Kumasi. So you see some appreciable voltages in Kumasi. Kumasi used to be very terrible when it comes to voltages. But now we've energized. We are going to hopefully energize Aboasi Prestea so that Aboasi Kumasi will be through by the end of April. And that is what we are doing now. Now, the impact of all this, we've talked about the delays. We've suspended all these projects. The expansion of the third bulk supply point in Accra, Adjoin-Gano, has been suspended. Thankfully, MIDA is funding A4BSP. We have delays in debt service, reach of financial. It's like we owe everybody anyway, so. Right-of-way compensation is a big issue for us. Now, Ghanaians are very wise. Before you start, you have to pay. And sometimes you see a Deba of chiefs in Gridco's offices. You think we're organizing some grand Deba. The chiefs are coming for their monies. We've cut down training programs. Some repairs and maintenances have been suspended. We are doing only critical ones. So now what we are doing that, apart from I told you of the Burkinabes, what they did, some mining companies have forwarded us some monies just to try, because when the lines are good, it's also good for them. So Gridco, we just want to help you with your maintenance activities, and later you pay us back. So in-house, we're also re-engineering, trying to reduce costs, because the transmission service charge is our only income. So we are trying to improve up our business processes to enhance our operational efficiencies. We've managed to cut down fuel costs a lot. As I said, we've suspended some planned projects, attending to only critical maintenance activities, and arranging for pre-financing. Unfortunately, this took everybody by surprise. You heard on Monday morning, and that is the new risk that has just emerged. We never thought that someone would be capable of intentionally bringing down a national infrastructure. But unfortunately, it has come to meet us. Last month, I was coming up, if you know the terrain well, I was coming out of the Vignari thermal plant. There's a shortcut to avoid traffic. And I saw that the 33 kV ECG cables from the new Tema substation is a huge number of cables. And that's where ECG takes power from for Tema, Nungwa, and the rest. And I saw that they were all bent. So I sent a picture to my ECG colleagues and said, you have a short circuit here. And just yesterday I learned that, no, there was no fault. Somebody actually put a burning lorry tie by the cable to burn them. For whatever reason, I just can't fathom. I don't know why. So this is what we have. In fact, when we heard in the morning that the tower had collapsed, we were saying, oh, I'm sure it's these squatters, they want parts. But when we got closer, we found out that no, this is a deliberate. In fact, I didn't want to use the word sabotage, but that was it. because it was well executed. And later in the afternoon, we found out that, it wasn't just one tower. There were attempts on other towers. So if you look at the positioning on the tower, and you see a whole farm of transmission lines from the Volta substation to smelter. So it's a whole farm of it. And they've targeted a series of towers. So the intention is that if those towers go down, it means that we will not be able to evacuate power from all the about 1,500 or so generating facilities in Tema. That's going to collapse the entire system. This incident almost collapsed the system. So you had outages, the AFLS operated, and we knocked off loads up to Kumasi just because of this. Because it fell on the adjoining tower and the two lines came off. So currently we've isolated them and we're able to evacuate power on the remaining lines. Do I have time? My time is gone. Okay. Okay, so we can summarize this. You are sure? Okay. Okay, so we'll do our best to make sure that the transmission network is always adequate to evacuate and transmit power to customers. But as I told you, we're also operators of the power system. Our peak demand now, we believe, can be more than this. It's now almost 2,700. It happened in February. March, is our summer. It's the hottest. Demand is still going up. We have dispatch challenges. Basically, it's been mentioned because of fuel. We are managing the deficit and dispatching Akosombo full blast. So you can see that the Akosombo units are almost full blast, 900 megawatts. The installed capacity is about this, 4,800. Available is about 2,700. That's a huge gap. And much of this capacity is unavailable because of fuel challenges. There are faults on some power plants, and some have mandatory maintenance activities being done. So we'll share this with you. But these are the plants which are unavailable, a lot of them. So you might have the capacity. As we were telling one honorable that, look, you can buy a Mercedes-Benz, nice, in your house. If you don't have money to buy fuel, you walk to your office and walk home. This is what is happening. We had good rains last year. This is how the reservoir elevation looks like. I wish I had added VR's plant. The plant is way above this. We've gone below this. But Akosombo is not doing bad. This is how it's coming, hoping that by June the rains will start and will then turn around and start writing. This is precarious. This is Bui. Bui is a smaller dam, and it's very sharp vein-shaped. So Bui fills up quickly and dries out more quickly. Because of the fuel challenges, we have had, over the times, beginning of the day, had to resort too much on Bui. Bui is supposed to be a peaking plant. So between 6 and 10 p.m., we schedule them. After that, we shut them down. That's what it's supposed to be. But it got to a time, in order to manage the load, Bui was being scheduled, and this is what has happened. This is the plant. This was projected for 2019. What is it? Yeah. And this one is the 2018. Now we've gone below the 2018 level. And if we don't manage it well, by the end of April, we would have dried out the lake. So now we've reverted to the plant. So you see that the gradient was this. Now we're shifting. Now we want to go back to this, to join the green curve. So if your lights are going off, so this is the assumption, and this is for now, for this week, the assumption that we have these, we running only during the peak. We schedule them only during the peak. And we have all these plants available. Yesterday, Asogli was doing 45 megawatts because there was not enough gas. So VNR's TT1PP was shut down, KTPP was shut down, it was only Asogli. So when that happens, we have to manage the load in order to keep the system at 50 Hz. Our plans indicate that peak off peak, with all those plants on, there will be no load shedding. Unfortunately, as I'm speaking to you, Asogli is only back because we hear, VNRA tells us that Nigeria has called that more fuel is coming. So if that comes, then from today's peak, we'll be smiling. But as I'm telling you now, it's not an easy situation, and we are trying to manage the system. Thank you. Sorry for...
Thank you very much, Engineer Makba. I could see that you've all enjoyed the presentations. However, we've gone way over time because we didn't start early. And so I'm going to give opportunity. I have 3 rows, 1 per row. And if you smile well, when you raise your hand, I would call you. If your smile is not broad enough, so let's start with this row, and I can only take 1. 1. My IPP is smiling nicer, so let me go first to my IPP. It's based on the smile, the level of smile. So the ladies smile better. Where's the other mic? And please, presenters, take note of the questions so that you know who is going to address it. Even though I've been in the system for a while, I won't help anybody.
Your time is up.
Don't worry. Go.
Don't worry, Harold.
He doesn't even want the 3 questions.
Sorry.
He says my time is up.
Very, very short.
Okay.
To the regulator, you are considering electric vehicles. Have you considered electric trains? Because our railways are now operating. To the gas, Ghana Gas, industrial use for gas. Is it possible for VALCO to use gas for heating? It will free up a lot of power.
Okay, so they will note that. I'm moving now to I'll come back. Oh. You are not even smiling. You are not even attempting. You are not attempting to smile. Okay, the one who is smiling broadly, George. No, I told you I'll come back to him. I'll come back. Don't worry.
You will not get my vote.
Unfortunately, you don't have a vote. But I'll still come back to you. As a courtesy to the fact that you are visiting me. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is to the regulator. When he was presenting the projected outlook for our power, I realized that he didn't, the number of years up to 2030, 37, he never included nuclear. And we are aware that nuclear has been in the system for a while now, and I want to know why, till now, if you're talking about such projections, nuclear is not mentioned. Thank you.
Okay. We will move to the last column. Okay, only one person is smiling, so please just give him the mic.
Okay, my name is Lukman Salifu. Dr. Asante, when you were talking about renewables, the fact that because we have, in quotes, excess capacity, and so we're not considering so much of other generation, I just felt that it's pushed those of us who are in the waste management sector, to think of other options. Because waste to energy seemed the obvious, easy way to go if you don't want to do the usual land filling and all that. Now, waste to energy is no longer attractive because power purchasing agreements will not be very fruitful, as he's just said. And so now, I'm asking, in the renewable equation, I didn't see you list waste to energy. Is that the reason? Because now we have to think about waste to diesel, which is the next stage we having to grapple with because of that excess capacity in quotes that we have.
Thank you very much. And I'll come back to my my visitor, who is a past president of the NSA. Yes, and he incidentally going to give me some votes.
Thank you very much. I'm a Nigerian, and I like to congratulate Ghana for at least what we have seen, because even though the regulator and the operator, the thing seems to be a little bit different. One is saying they have excess capacity, another one is saying that. So anyway, I think you'll sort that out. But you see, I'm worried the theme of this conference is engineering and innovation, catalyst for Ghana Beyond Aid. So I would have thought that, you see, there will be emphasis on producing power, and like he's talking of Burkina Faso, and selling to Burkina Faso so that you get dollars. Why are you not emphasizing that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the mic will go now to... let's start with Doc, and then...
Yeah, I think I got the question from the lady over there. With respect to VALCO, VALCO certainly has approached Ghana Gas, and indeed the ministry, to see whether we can supply them gas for combined heat and power. And I think we are talking to them, because the key thing really is the price to which we have to supply them for them to be competitive. And that's way below what the financial regulator has actually decreed, if you will. So unless there's a special dispensation for the ministry or government to say that, hey, try and provide gas for these people for combined heat and power under the industrial tariff arrangement. So industrial development tariff essentially means that we reduce the cost of gas, delivered cost of gas to those units or those enterprises which the government really wants to incentivize, so they can really help with the development agenda industrially. We would have to make sure that it makes sense for us to buy or transport gas or provide services and commodity that is way higher than what they can afford. But we are talking to them, and I think if they take a little bit of gas, maybe we can handle the small deficit. But if it's huge volumes, I think it's going to really eat into not just us, but GMPC's margins as well. So we're talking to them.
Thank you. Dr. Asante?
Thank you. Electric trains, the answer is yes, we've considered it, but the lag time is a lot bigger for that. Basically, it would involve the whole railway development infrastructure, and it would obviously take more time. We're looking at very short term, so for this year, even we want to have some impact. So that's why we're focusing on vehicles first. But the longer term plan would include any other form of transportation. So definitely trains included. The other two questions, one on nuclear, one on waste to energy. I think this illustrates the challenge. Each, if you like, technology project has, if you like, a picture of the world which looks like it suits them. So waste to energy would make the good reasons why we should consider it. Nuclear, the same. We have a national program on nuclear. The challenge is that the demand for power is looking for cheap power, and it's looking for power also that, should I say, takes into account what we have already signed up to The biggest challenge we have with nuclear is that it comes in large doses. And we have already committed ourselves to many meals, being other small PPAs. So making the room for nuclear in the timeline that I showed was somewhat challenged. As you saw, we only had gas in the very last quadrant, which was the 2030 plus. So what we have said in the larger plan is that all the thermals will have to compete for that. So whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal, whether it's gas, they all compete for that slot. The plan that I showed was the one which came up as the least regret. So we had considered nuclear, we had considered coal, given particular scenarios or strategies which demanded that we diversify, and therefore nuclear was in there. When we analyzed all of them, it did not come out as the least regret strategy. But it is certainly one that, as a country, we can decide that because we want to diversify, we will, if you like, push nuclear in there. That is a decision, of course, that has to be made as a country. We are not in that position to make that decision. So what I've showed is what is the least regret solution, the one which, under all the scenarios we considered, gave us the lowest cost, which I'm quite sure you all agree is what everybody's asking for. So waste to energy is actually in there, but I think it's fairly small, again, because it tends to be quite expensive. And finally, in terms of the planning horizon, you know, when it comes to the power plants and when they come in, the companies want them to come sooner, the plants suggest it must be later. When it comes to, even on the gas side, part of the challenge is that we all see the world differently. As my senior brother says, you can't look at a number just on one time, its location, its time, and its quantities. And yes, that is how we're all doing our planning. But there are different perspectives on things, and yes, they will have to be resolved. Finally, innovation is where we solve all these problems. I talked about renewables, the impacts it's having. We're talking about electric vehicles. So all of these things are, if you like, the interventions we have to make against the horizon that we see. And basically, even though Dr. Asante is having two different views, we are working together to solve them. Thank you.
Okay, Engineer McBahn.
Yes, on the question regarding the export, I share his view. It can be, should I say, frustrating sometimes that you know that this is a market that this year alone can fetch Ghana about $300 million. Just with the exports that we are doing, if we do it right, supply to Togo, Benin, and supply to Sonabel in Burkina Faso. The Malians are even knocking because there have been plans laid out long ago that we need to build a transmission line from Bolga to Sikasso, in Mali. And there are opportunities there for us. And for this Ghana, the 330 kV line, I mean, it beats my mind that when the project is almost completed, we are in this situation, and Burkina Faso is literally asking for power, and we are like powerless. So, and we have the capacity available in Ghana. All we need to do is to do the right thing. We do the right thing, we get the transmission line completed, and the Burkinabes, they say they want more than 200. We want to limit them to 200. And they are ready to take that power. So the market is there. We just have to do the right things.
Thank you very much. I think, no, please don't bring your hands up because I won't call you. We will conclude because we've done over time. But there's something about Ghana and Nigeria. When Nigeria scores, Ghana must score. And so my IPP, or PP, past president, also have a few comments to make. And so I would give him 30 seconds to make a few comments so that Ghana will be one and Nigeria will be one.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. Yeah, I've often said that Ghana is going nowhere without engineering, and I think we observed it here. The thing that I'd like to draw everybody's attention to is the competence that was displayed here this morning. I mean, the people that we have. You know, really, I think that should be the focus. You know, that, and I've had the privilege of visiting Dr. Asante's workshop, Ghana Gas, and I hope you accommodate more of us to visit that outfit, because in many ways it represents the kinds of things we should be doing with our engineering facilities. You know, being able to, you know, drive out those Chinese and so, and say we can do it. I think, you know, that kind of spirit we need to generate. In all these discussions, one thing is also becoming very clear, and it is that pure technology engineering can go only so far. We need to reorder our national priorities. And I think as a group, this is one of the things we need to take up. Because talking about the opportunities, we cannot realize the opportunities because of what I consider to be a relatively modest investment. We seem to find the money to do what, in my humble opinion, are less important things. So if we don't reorder our national priorities, all this talent that is in here is not going to go very far. So I would urge us as an institution, and I've also said that engineering practitioners must take interest in politics. You know, and let me, we have to take interest in politics so that we can reorder our national priorities. Otherwise, we cannot take advantage of all this great talent that we see in the room here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please sit down for half a minute. There's one thing I would like, you know, because of the fact that we are over time, I didn't get the opportunity to make any comments as the moderator. But there is one thing that I'd like you to leave this place with. The fact that as a people, a lot of our procurement is uncompetitive. And we are saddled with very high cost of energy because of that. Panic procurement. You wait until you get into a crisis, and then they come and they sell power to you at 15, and it's continuing. And it is something we must stop as a people. That is what I'd like to leave with you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Please, we've overshot this session by more than 30 minutes. Yes, we are supposed to have ended at 11 o'clock, and then have snack at 11, and start the next session at 11:30. So, in fact, the other two groups have eaten the snack for and on your behalf. So. But after snack, we have 3 sessions. In here, we have Community Water and Sanitation Agency. The chief executive is at the back there. They've had some reforms in the sector. And last year, they've employed more than 500 people managing rural water supply systems and community systems so that they can pay their bills to ECG and PDS, etc. So we'll have that presentation in here. Then, far out, opposite the reception, that is the Nunya conference room, we have a session on renewable energy, electricity, and the future of nuclear technology. That is taking place over here. And then right in the overflow room, I've been told not to say the other room again, we have a section on innovations and the geotechnical engineering. So 2 minutes, they're ready to roll. So 2 minutes, 5 minutes snack. The snack is downstairs. So you can go pick something and then we can move on. I think our breakfast was heavy and it's almost lunchtime. So to make up time, we have to move. Thank you all very much. And we are very happy for your wonderful participation. Thank you. Please, we have a place outside there where they are doing massages, manicure, pedicure. If you are interested, right across. Facials, manicure, pedicure, massages, all of that to help us keep ourselves well and nice. Thank you. Specially organized by Wine, but men can also go and participate in that. Thank you very much.